Dan and I will be co-presenting. Our goal today is to kind of discuss Windows 10. We've got a number of things to chat about and kind of link it, if we can, to our discussion from a couple weeks ago. Hopefully you were able to join us for that, and or will join us in 2 weeks when we have a discussion about Office 365. But those three components, EMS, or Enterprise Mobility Suite, Windows 10, and Office 365 compose a modern workplace. And so to some degree, we spent some time, 2 weeks ago, kind of chatting about data and how that's really kind of the heart of business and really how we operate. I'm going to go and use the pen a little bit here. And data's at the heart of things, right? And we spent some time talking about identity, I think, is a primary thing that Enterprise Mobility Suite is excellent at protecting. We're also spent some time talking about devices a couple weeks ago. And today, specifically, just to kind of orient you, we're going to be talking about the thing that's closest to data, right? Your operating system and the platform. So that's really kind of where we're going to be chatting about. And the other thing we did a couple weeks ago, and I want to keep this going throughout all three webinars, is we had a discussion, we had an agenda that looked like this, right? Wow, there's a lot of products and offerings, right? So we spent a couple weeks ago talking about all the items up there, and we walked through what some of the functionality was and some of the things you can see, and those were the Enterprise Mobility Suite. The bottom half of this we're going to spend talking about in 2 weeks, right? We're going to be talking about all the items you're seeing there, including Azure AD and Advanced eDiscovery and Skype and Teams and all those good things. And today our focus is going to be specifically on the third leg of that, which is the Windows 10 operating system. We're going to be talking about Enterprise and Windows Defender ATP and some elements thereof. And so because the product is focused, you think, oh, it's just an operating system. Well, it's an operating system with a lot of capabilities, and there's a lot of things that get lit up under the Enterprise licensing agreement. And so it's with that background, let's take a look at our agenda. Our goal is to kind of just do this introduction like we're doing here. Then we're going to, why would you go to Windows 10? What are the drivers as to what are motivating people? Then specifically, when you're licensing it, which can be a confusing item for just one simple operating system, there are a lot of features and functions that you may want to light up. And we're here to kind of at least overview them and talk about then what a design looks like. Designing an operating system rollout is important because there's some key choices that get made, which ultimately drive how fast you're going to be able to move, how fast you're going to be able to deploy. Things can be very simple or things can be more complicated, and ultimately those are based on some choices that you're making in terms of things that you'd like to light up. We'll talk briefly about the tools of the trade. We've got some time scheduled for Dan to specifically go in and demo some key functions of not only some of the tools, but some of the functionality you can get in terms of a rollout, specifically some modern rollout mechanisms called autopilot. And with the wrap and Q&A, I literally left a little more time for that aspect of this agenda, just because people do have some questions, and they're personal questions, and we certainly want this to be as open a forum as possible. So without further ado, let's jump into why Windows 10. So Windows 10 has been out for 3 years, 3.5 years at this point. Okay, adoption is we'll kind of show some numbers in a little bit, but we're seeing it. It's to some degree there was in the beginning, if you'll recall, there was a large push and a time frame by which Microsoft was offering an upgrade to Pro for a 1 year. And so a lot of people took advantage of that, and there was a large base of Windows 10 that's out there. And here's kind of the feedback that from my personal experience as well as from the industry, people are seeing, the following benefits. Operating systems are not thought of, first and foremost. People think about their apps oftentimes, but the fact is this is a very fast operating system. From my experience, I could never go backwards, and I do mean that never. I think I'd refuse to not have a search bar in the bottom left-hand to find data or item that I look for regularly. I'm very accustomed to using search, and I couldn't go away from that. Touch, as evidenced by the fingerprints on my screen, I use the touch capabilities of my device frequently. In fact, I was drawing on the screen just a few moments ago. Windows 7 did not have touch in mind. Right? It was developed under a different time frame. So Windows 8 changed that, and nobody ended up going to that operating system. So Surface devices, right, are very nice. So they've made a big dent in the industry. I see them all over. I myself am presenting from a Surface Book. Leveraging Windows Hello. We'll show that a little bit later, not necessarily a demo, but Windows Hello probably saves me 20 logins a day. Now, that doesn't mean it's any, I'm not going to say it's any more secure or less secure, but it's certainly very convenient. I sit down to my laptop, as I just did a few minutes ago, coming back from getting a water, and I didn't have to log in. It saw my face and it logged me in. That saved me a bunch of keystrokes and, possibly a minute of time, fat fingering, entering my wrong password often, all of the frustrations, if you will. It doesn't put passwords in your face, and Windows Hello saves me greatly there. So, and Windows 10 is everywhere. I'm seeing it. My mother-in-law has Windows 10. It's really been prolific. Your Xbox is running on Windows 10 at this point, and so forth. So, it's been out there. And I think to acknowledge, there's certainly been. In the beginning, when Windows 10 was coming out, they kind of made it look different, and to some degree, Microsoft has produced a Windows bar that's very similar to the experience you might be used to, and kind of negated the need for large training curves as people move between operating systems. Admin features on the right, I won't kind of list through all of them, but the browser has come along, kind of coming from the bottom. Code, we all know that how frequently our devices, whether they be Android, iPads, Windows systems, they all get patched on a frequent basis. And operating on a very old, it's 10-year-old operating system, Windows 10, and the code base for that is probably more like 12. That's some really old code and very difficult to secure, and therefore I think that's kind of one of the first areas that people think of as to what the rationale is. There's also some features and functions we'll kind of talk through, BitLocker and direct access, which might just be new terms to you at this point, but we're hoping to make those something that might be enticing for you about the operating system. All of that said, I think the real reason people are going to move and finally kind of jump off and with both feet is because the fact that in 14 months, no patches are coming out for the Windows 7 operating system, even on Service Pack 1. So it's reached the end of extended support, and that's it. So with that, we're seeing a lot of motion in the industry, and we'll kind of talk through some of these things. Here's where we sit today. These are the stats. I literally just pulled them down 2 or 3 days ago with regards to industry adoption. You have to keep in mind that this is all operating systems talking on the internet, and that's available to gather. But Windows 10 certainly got great market share, but look at that Windows 7 number, right? 41%, and let's just say that it gets down to 10%. Okay, and would exist, and a lot of people might just be in the next year. We're going to go from 41% to 10%. That means 30% of machines are going to be upgraded to Windows 10, like in the next year. That's my forecast, not necessarily all the Gartner and so forth, but it's a lot of machines, right, and a lot of projects underway, and certainly having so I think there's going to be some great momentum here in the next 12 months to get this, and a little bit of a race. We're certainly seeing that with our customer base now. Evidence, obviously with, all the machines out there, I think the people that are the most disciplined and probably the most motivated and probably have the most resources to go are your customers with IT departments that can plan for these things. And so you're seeing a lot of people piloting, dabbling, getting ready, maybe going through design, making some choices, purchasing, if they hadn't procured this licensing before, procuring that. And, according to some reports, total economic impact of Windows from Forrester, There's some desktop management savings and obviously reduction in security issues, which are helpful drivers. All of this thing said, this is exactly what we would say from our own experiences and from what the customers that we've deployed Windows 10 to. It's relatively easy. There hasn't been a lot of training needs. The effort is in the journey, but once you're there, I think people are like, that just feels good, right? To kind of be on a more modern, better, supportable operating system. So here's what you're kind of used to. This has been the story for a long time, and it still continues to be the story today, right? Joining your computer to Active Directory, using group policies, maybe to control behavior, provide login scripts, controlling the device with System Center. Yet some customers are really coming along and saying, you know what, we didn't exist 4 years ago. We don't have an Active Directory, or we're really excited about our journey to the cloud, and what can our workstation do for the cloud? Well, I hear about the capability to join the cloud and join Azure Active Directory. I hear about the capabilities to control this device outside of GPOs. I hear about these MDM products and capabilities to mobile application management. And I was curious about those from a couple weeks ago. How does that all come true? Well, the good news is Windows 10 kind of sits in the middle and is ready for both of those worlds as to how it's going to be managed. And so with that sort of as the background, I thought we'd dive in and kind of take a look at licensing and features. Now, stay with me. I know licensing and features sounds like, it's nap time, right? But it's important to kind of know these things and know, what you're investing in and what you're getting for that investment. And so we try to make this relatively quick, and I think to some degree it's pretty much straightforward, though there's always nuances in licensing. But in this case, Microsoft effectively has 3 flavors of Windows 10. One flavor is going to be Windows 10 in S mode. And I guess this is my knowledge. Dan, you can certainly correct me, or any of our school customers might be able to correct me, but it's very focused on the education market. It's very focused on being a preloaded operating system with some devices, with the goal of providing Windows 10 features and a set thereof almost very extensively for the school environment, the education world. More commonly, in the commercial world, we'll see Windows 10 Pro. Windows 10 Pro is kind of, and certainly has a lot of features. Again, you'll see BitLocker and Windows Hello. Windows 10 Pro has a ton of features that are built right out of the box also. And then there's Windows 10 Enterprise. And Windows 10 Enterprise is where we start to differentiate. So basically the mantra I see is, if you go with Pro, you're going to be missing out on the following things. Okay, and these will build up here quickly, if you will. We'll kind of leave it there for a moment. Our intention is to kind of quickly chat through some of these, because these are what I would call features, right? They're operating system features. And each one is important in and of itself. And it might just be for one of these features that you really need the enterprise feature set. But let's take a look and kind of look under the hood a little bit at enterprise features. First one, and again, one of those things I couldn't imagine living without, direct access. Now, direct access of yesteryear has given way to a new name called Always On VPN. But the entitlement is, if you are an enterprise Windows 10, that you have the capability to deploy an infrastructure, meaning a server or some other changes need to be made, to always have your Windows 10 clients, which are domain joined, to always be connected to your organization. What does that mean? Well, think of it as like a VPN cable to your device all the time, everywhere. It's basically easy VPN. It's the capability, as you kind of see there with my mappings for our drives here. Those drive mappings are always available to me when I'm at home, when I'm working remote at a customer, when I'm here in the office. They're just always there. I'm always VPN'd. And this direct access feature also allows me to print at the office from home. It allows remote control. It allows me to be managed as a desktop from the office. So I'm always connected, because who's to say that inside the firewall is safe and outside the firewall isn't safe, right? So direct access has capabilities to do conditional connections and things of that nature. But this is a very powerful feature, high end of usability for your employees or staff. Certainly can answer all kinds of questions about that, but that's just one element that's lit up with the enterprise. Windows Hello, right? Windows Hello is available under both Enterprise and Pro. However, Windows Hello also allows you to activate things like Credential Guard and other features that are thereof. So Windows Hello is a nice usability feature, again, saving me a lot of login time. It doesn't always have to be implemented as a camera, as it is in my case. There's fingerprint and there's retina scanners and other ways that that device manufacturers have taken advantage of built-in Windows Hello capabilities in the operating system to light up those devices for users. Those devices are then used to further protect things under Credential Guard. This is a big one, and a lot of people don't know this, so I'm going to kind of use this as an education nugget, but Windows versions are available in general for 18 months. Okay? They come out, they're released, and then 18 months later, they're done. Okay? This is not like your Windows, so it will always be called Windows 10, right? There's no Windows 11 on the horizon. This is Windows 10, and it's had multiple iterations of Windows 10 since its inception 3 years ago. You get 18 months, unless you're an enterprise customer. Then you can extend that up to 30 months for what we call the Fall Edition. Let me drill in on a different chart that kind of brings this home to light also. And I want you to take note also of the reference in the bottom right to a blog that might be helpful for you, that might describe this as well as describe the process I'm about to talk about. Here's the version history in simplified format for Windows 10. You can see up at the top, version 1507 presumably was released about July timeframe of 2015. Okay, that's how I know the operating system is about 3 years old. That version's gone. Okay, meaning it's no longer supported. It's past its extended life. Same thing with version 1511, 1607, 1703. Right, 1703 obviously being March of 2017. You'll notice they're falling into a pattern here where they have a spring update, 1703, and a fall update, 1709. Spring update, 1803, fall update, 1809. You can kind of guess what the next version likely is to be, 1903, right? Coming out in around the March, April timeframe of next year. They sometimes have other street names, if you will, as I kind of noted in the parentheses there. But note there are 4 versions that are out of date already. Okay? And it's very important to know that once you're on Windows 10, you still have to manage that environment. And so the blog in the bottom right actually has a script within it for you to run on your environment. It's a very one-line script to kind of go look for Windows 10 devices that are no longer getting updates. It's important to know that. It's obviously important to also remember in the upper left that you can get 30 months for the fall edition of if you're on the enterprise version, which might give you an extra window of time when you don't have to move versions. Windows Defender ATP. Windows Defender ATP is included in the enterprise version of Windows 10. The code and bits are already there. It's just a licensing activation to get to run. As it implies, this is not Defender, the antivirus and anti-malware. This is Defender ATP. It's the next level up. And as you kind of notice in the bottom left-hand corner, this operates independent of the AV and malware protection you may have running. Maybe you've chosen to run Windows Defender. Maybe you've chosen to run Symantec's product, Sophos, or others. Regardless of what you're providing as your antivirus and anti-malware, you can layer on top Defender ATP to provide 2 capabilities. One is without any signature patterns, or without a signature database, if you will. It simply will look at the behavior of the machine and use the cloud to say, whoa, I think we have some anomalous, strange behavior occurring on that machine, and I'm not going to allow that file to be opened. This goes above and beyond the signatures that might be available in your AVN malware. Great protection with the very latest technology coming from cloud diagnostics. Secondly, it provides, should the machine go into a situation and start spreading, let's say some unknown ransomware or some other zero-day issues, you have rollback capabilities and forensic tools to identify what's going on. So Defender ATP, very strong technology. This is being introduced not only across endpoints, as you're seeing here, this is being introduced on servers and other devices, in Azure endpoints also, as this is their way of having capabilities to reach in and see what's going on in the networks that may be malicious and help the security puzzle. So another great enterprise feature. Really strong feature here, Windows, and this is kind of two things wrapped in one, but today it provides a VDA license, and a VDA license effectively is the capability to run a Windows 10 desktop in a shared terminal, maybe Citrix or RDS type environment. Okay, so the RDS license allows you that transfer capability to run that there, otherwise having to pay for it separately. The other thing that's noted here is Microsoft has announced something called the Windows Virtual Desktop. So I kind of combined the two into one slide here. But the Windows Virtual Desktop, it's nothing that you can look at today. It's in private preview, although very shortly should be in public preview. It's just announced a month ago. This is going to leverage a back-end, basically fully built-out Windows 10 environment that you could scale and provision relatively quickly. This could serve 10 users for a little test, or 1,000 users, literally just at your, based on the dials that you're turning. And it's going to combine the Windows 10 desktop with the enterprise mobility security lockdowns that we kind of talked about last week. Things like MFA, things like ATP, and it's also going to provide Office 365 functionality built right in. So, your Office license is going to be already there and provisioned. Again, I haven't seen this yet, just been announced, but in my readings, the Windows Virtual Desktop might be something to keep an eye out for, and the Windows Virtual Desktop licensing provisions will be interesting to note. All right, so then when we walk into Windows 10, and there's a number of others, I think we just kind of wanted to skim the surface of some of the features and hit some of the highlights. When we're walking into a Windows 10 project, there certainly are some areas to chat through, and Dan will kind of help me discuss any of the areas here that might be relevant. But these, certainly we have a lot of questions that we have to ask, and questions you might want to ask of yourself in terms of getting to the bottom line as to how you're going to deploy Windows 10. I'm not going to walk through each one here, but let's just pluck off a few. UEFI. UEFI is a new secure BIOS, effectively, that it's basically an upgrade to your BIOS. And Dan, if you want to describe it a little bit more, but this is the underpinnings, this UEFI. If you move to UEFI, then you can take advantage of certain things like Credential Guard that are on top of that. Anything else you want to add to that, Dan?
Yes, with the UEFI, you can enable something like secure boot, so somebody can't boot your Windows machine with a cracked CD, boot device, boot CD, or something like that to try to access your credentials. So it would only boot with a device that has a signed boot signature. So there's only a few.
Perfect. And then things like BitLocker and MBAM, obviously you're going through a metamorphosis here in terms of your changes from Windows 7 to Windows 10. So it might be time to ask yourself, well, now is a good time to go through that change. And so, yes, let's include BitLocker on our next image, or and you might want to if you're rolling it out there broadly and concerned about people losing their keys or forgetting their pins or things like that, there are tools known as Microsoft BitLocker and Administration and Management, or MBAM, as it's known in the industry, that might want to have questions about, or what does that look like? How do I license that? Do I need it? Those sorts of questions. So those are parts of design. New hardware in the upper right. When you're going to Windows 10, were you planning on a refresh? Oh yeah, we're on a 3-year refresh cycle, and 1/3 of our machines will be net new hardware. So the net new hardware, we really don't want to put Windows 7 on there. And if we put Windows 10 on, do we just load it up the way it's been loaded, or do we do some other things at this time as part of that change? So again, not intending to walk through each of these, but in the lower left-hand corner, Azure AD join, that's kind of that modern way to bridge between the way we've always done things, which is a domain join, and what are the advantages of an active Azure AD join and co-managing. And Dan, I don't know if you want to highlight any benefits specifically or some of your experiences recently. I know we're going to kind of walk through some of that later.
Yeah, so with hybrid AD Azure Active Directory join, you can co-manage machines traditionally and in the cloud. So most people are doing things the traditional method, and maybe they're not ready to move everything to the cloud right away, but they can move some policies, some of those workloads to, say, MDM like Intune. For maybe a simple one might be the Windows Defender antivirus settings. So they can transfer all those settings into the cloud to be applied to the machines while still doing software distribution traditionally with Configuration Manager.
So once we understand, and you might develop your own use cases for yourself. Maybe you've got a roaming sales force that kind of is never comes in the office, right? They operate out of your geography, and you not only want to have an innovative to deploy the image, which might be the autopilot, which we'll talk about as a tool later, but you also might want them Azure AD joined because the group policies have never been very effective for them, and you want to control policies up in the cloud to impact their machines as opposed to home running back to your organization and your domain. So these are all some, this is a smattering of design questions. We have many more with regards to some things you're going to want to ask of yourself. An example of kind of drilling into detail on one. Another one is telemetry, right? So the Windows 10 machines, and specifically in the beginning, and if anyone recalls the history, there was always, oh my goodness, there's all this, I have privacy concerns regarding my Windows 10. It's going to advertise my location. No, it's not, right? There was a lot of FUD created in the industry around let's say Cortana and what information it was collecting about you and so forth. So in any case, all of this information is configurable at the end of the day, and there's a lot more detail regarding what Microsoft does with the data, what is the data. I just didn't want to mind numb you with all of that stuff, but do know that the idea of how much information, generic information, you provide about usage is configurable, right? And they put things into buckets. There's a little dial effectively that you can turn with regards to what data you'd like to provide, if any, to Microsoft with regards to the experience. And so that's another area for design and walkthrough as an example. But at the end of the day, and at the end of the design, what you're really going to get down to is this, okay? How am I going to roll out Windows 10? You've already discussed the features. You've determined, yes, I want to use BitLocker, and yes, I've got some new hardware, and no, I'm not going to use the UEFI, and no, I'm not going to use Credential Guard, and yes, we're going to use Defender, and whatever the yeses and nos are, they all come down to, okay, great. It's going to put your machines, and likely not into one bucket, but possibly into different buckets in terms of how they're going to be either refreshed in the upper left, replaced in the top middle, or whether you're going to do an in-place upgrade, which is relatively straightforward in the upper right. Okay, there might be some machines where you're just doing subscription activations. You might have some use cases, as I mentioned, remote sales force might be great. Teachers in a lab might be a great use case for autopilot. We certainly have had unique situations where we've had a need for management and deployment, such as kiosk machines. Hey, these machines are going to be sitting in our lobby, and we've got 10 machines we'd like to set up. Let's set them up in kiosk mode. All right. Well, kiosk mode is a specific implementation where, really the user's not allowed to get back to the start buttons, and they're really limited in what they can do. And there's a lot of capabilities to do unique things with Windows 10. And what you've designed before is going to drive which of these scenarios you're going to fit into best, and it might not just be one bucket. So with those kind of as the background, let's jump into the tools of the trade. And it's 11:31, so our timing's good. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes looking at tools of the trade, and then we're going to spend 10 minutes, Dan, kind of showing us some tools and walking through some scenarios, and then we'll get to some Q&A. So for tools of the trade, and again, keep in mind this deck, this video, and even a snippet video, 2 minutes or less, will be available probably within 24 hours up on our blog site. So if you're looking for this slide deck or thereof, or hey, I couldn't see that one in the upper left, what was it talking about, just know that this will be available in your hands shortly. So walking through some of the tools, and by no means are these all the tools, but let's just kind of get a glimpse of some of the things that are here. Dan, feel free to kick in on anything that I'm saying either incorrectly or otherwise, but user state migration tool is something that is stands alone, but also is built into SCCM and otherwise. A user state migration tool's goal is to pick up settings and data from a user and kind of scrape it from the device and either move it and transition it to a new machine, or to basically lock it in place so that when a new image is overlaid, that it doesn't go away and is available after the new image is laid down. There is a lot of nice capabilities within there. It's XML based, and there's some configuration and tweaks if there's additional data you'd like to get outside of the default settings, but in general, great tool.
I just wanted to mention that in that task sequence, when we talked about UEFI, this would be a good opportunity to, say, take a Windows 7 32-bit machine in the legacy mode. It comes down and we'll use a Dell configuration tool to change the BIOS to UEFI, and then we'll wipe the drive and then install Windows 10 in 64-bit, and then install all the apps and then restore the user's data, so they could effectively go from Windows 7 x86 legacy mode to Windows 10 64-bit in UEFI mode.
Great. Yeah, and what Dan just did right there is kind of walk us top to bottom, not necessarily even through the user state migration, but through something called a task sequence. Obviously, this is a much simpler task sequence in the upper left that's illustrated here, but the idea is task sequence is like a visual script for what it is you would do manually if you were sitting there at that machine, except you're building a task sequence or a script for executing this change, right? Some might be scrape the machine for data. That's the user state migration tool. Next is, as you see highlighted here, upgrade the operating system, restart the computer, put the data back, things of that nature. So these task sequences might be new to some of you, and these task sequences are available in a number of the tools. SCCM has it built in, Windows Deployment Scripting, or WDS, Windows Deployment Server, and the Migration Deployment Toolkit also has them. So this idea of task sequences might be new to some of you, but certainly is a popular way to script the move, the changes. Dan, why don't you chat about the Upgrade Readiness tool while people kind of look through the visuals as to what's here. Generally, my comment on it is it's a reporting tool for looking at your environment today and saying what apps and drivers are likely going to provide you some challenges as you move to Windows 10. What other nuggets can you add?
So it's cloud-based, so it's in Azure OMS, and we run these reports against your machines to determine if there's something that would block your upgrade. Well, let's say there's an application that's installed on the machine that will not work with Windows 10, that would block your upgrade to Windows 10. Or it'll try to list out applications that might be incompatible based on other users' reports or testing.
Awesome. And I think an older version of this that some may be familiar with, that's still around today, if desired to use this too, is something called the App Compat Toolkit. This literally looks at your applications. I mean, in general, I think it's 99% of applications. Dan, maybe you can give us some examples of maybe some apps where you've had some challenges moving to Windows 10. In general, most of them go just fine. Windows 10's got a lot of capabilities to run the older legacy applications, but maybe some examples you have?
Yeah, so the older Cisco VPM client definitely will not run with Windows 10, and when you actually try to run the upgrade, it'll detect that it's on there and roll the upgrade back to where you were. So you have to
knowing about that in advance would be helpful.
Yep.
Good deal. So that's just one good example of a application that maybe has some challenge. Okay, two more. The Windows or Microsoft Toolkit, or MDT. This effectively is a standalone tool for building a deployment sequence or in a task sequence, and leveraging a tool. It provides no management after the machine is deployed, but at least is a helpful tool for building that script and how you would like to move the content. So again, some of the bells and whistles are not in there that are in SCCM, but it's a lightweight SCCM. And certainly, we could list a number of other tools, but here's some other tools that we've found helpful that customers are using. I mean, software updates, right? Your WSUS environment is still critical here. After all, oftentimes you're going to want to deploy patches both before and after migrations, and that WSUS can be built into SCCM. Group policies are still highly leveraged. If you want to, sometimes you're pushing applications with SCCM. Sometimes you're pushing some security lockdowns, or even let's say a favorite into a browser might be pushed with the group policy. BitLocker administration and management we discussed a little earlier. If BitLocker's chosen as the encryption mechanism for your drives. And then Dan certainly can give us some details on LAPS.
So LAPS is a local administrator account password solution, and basically what it does is changes the local administrator password that you specify on a certain frequency, and then stores the password in Active Directory. So not every machine will have a unique password for that account that changes on a regular basis. So somebody, if they can actually get or guess that password, wouldn't have access to all the other machines using that same account, local account.
Perfect. Yeah, that's age-old situation, right, where you've used the same account to have local access across your entire environment. So those are some of it's kind of a background on some of the tools. Obviously, there's additional modern tools and methods that Dan's going to kind of walk through now. I've kind of just have this labeled as demo time, and Dan, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, right, queuing things up, Dan's going to show us specifically 3 different scenarios is his intention. I think he's going to walk us through Autopilot, which is a new technology for kind of a soup to nuts migration of a desktop with just a pre-built script on the back. I don't think we're going to watch the whole thing move, but just kind of the early entrance thereof, as well as a few tools of the trade.
Okay, so you can see my screen, Bruce?
Adam, can you?
Yes.
Yes, we see it fine.
Okay.
Sorry, just
okay. So this is a virtual machine that we're gonna demonstrate Autopilot. So Autopilot lets you basically configure a machine ahead of time. So when you could present a machine, take it right out of the shrink wrap, connect to the internet, and log in and have it automatically configured for you. So this is kind of what they would see when they first turn the machine on. And that's the right keyboard. No And then I could just log in with an Azure account. And if we had it already set up that our machines that got added to Azure were automatically enrolled in Intune MDM, then we could push down all sorts of different policies. So I'm just going to sign in with my Azure account.
And I think a great use case for this might be field personnel. As one example, someone's go grab a computer from from the store, from your Best Buy, or here's a computer in its shrink wrap. I send it to you. You log in and give it some time, right? And it's going to be configured per corporate policy with the corporate apps and so forth, because it's been pre-staged. So.
And you could choose all these different settings ahead of time if you'd like. Boom, and I'm logged in, and I didn't have to do anything to the machine, which is pretty nice. The way that works is the OEM will provide you, or can provide you, it's like a serial number or a hash information about that PC. And then what you do is you get that, they can upload it for you, or you can upload that information to Azure. So that file might contain multiple machines in there, and to upload it, it shows up as a machine, as a device, and then when it knows that the autopilot settings should apply to that device when you log in. All right, so
awesome.
I'm going to skip that part. So that would be for cloud-only, management. So what would happen with that is if I had some sort of Intune policies that would apply to that, if it's enrolled, I could say I would configure my Defender virus policy for this machine. And I could configure all these settings for it, which I would normally configure using SCCM or group policy or something else. And then I have Defender setting down here.
So obviously at this point we're in the Intune console, which was we briefly showed it last week or 2 weeks ago at the EMS demo. So this is kind of how Modern Workplace kind of comes together as a product here to kind of provide a unique modern experience.
So maybe I'm not ready to manage everything with cloud only, but maybe I want to transition to this eventually. So they have a thing called with SCCM or Configuration Manager 1806, I think, or later they have a thing called co-management. So co-management lets you take a domain join machine and hybrid join it to Azure AD, so they're joined to both. And then in Configuration Manager, we can transition some workloads to Intune. So in this case, I have two devices that are hybrid joined, and I've transitioned the management of endpoint protection to them from Configuration Manager to Intune. And the way you could set that up is in co-management here, and we can define what workloads we want to transition to Intune. So we could do, some of the things, or in stages if we're not ready to make that jump all the way at once. Another way you could provision the machine is with the Windows Configuration Designer, and you could just create a provisioning package in here, and you would put that provisioning package on a, say maybe on a USB drive, plug the machine in there, it would detect that there was the USB with a provisioning package, and then we could set up, a whole bunch of settings that we wanted that machine to do when it was first set up. So we could, give it a name, starts with, your domain, and then do a random number afterwards. We can do a product key, application certificates, all sorts of different things with a provisioning package.
That's great, Dan.
What was the other thing you wanted to look at? I've forgotten. Sorry.
Hey, that's okay. I think the SCCM console. SCCM
task sequences.
Autopilot and task sequence. Yeah, I think we saw a great example, obviously, of a fully built-out task sequence, but kind of where are they? Obviously. For years we've been deploying images to machines, and you certainly can build up your whole image, right, with all the drivers that you would need everywhere within your environment, and you can kind of, I'll call it the great big blob, right, the image. We always called that like the like just an unwieldy image, if you will. And instead, task sequence is more of a capability to build that, and you can inject drivers that are relevant to your device because you do a query and say, oh, you're a Lenovo, this, and therefore you inject the proper driver. So those are just some of the differences we've seen in terms of how images have been built over the years, and that gives you a background for task sequencing. But why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah, so this is just a simple task sequence. So the first thing it does is start in Windows PE. So the machine boots up in Windows PE. It goes through and detects if the machine is in the BIOS mode or UEFI mode. And if it is in UEFI mode, say it's going to partition the disk appropriately with GPT partitions. We can pre-provision BitLocker. We can apply an operating system to it. We can configure the local password, or we could basically generate a random one. We could tell it to join the domain. We could apply device drivers. Like Bruce was saying, we could also say we have a line for each model, and it would do a query under here to determine if it's that model, and if it is, it would run that line and skip the line if it's a different model. It'll automatically set up the configuration manager client, enable BitLocker, and then we could do other things too. We could add software, so we could install applications, and then we could just go through and choose any applications that we wanted to install when it's running the task sequence. So rather than embedding all these applications in the image, we just have a plain image, and then we install the applications after the image is laid down. So when it's easy to change out, see these are all old versions of Java. Instead of rebuilding the whole image to put the latest version of Java in there, I could just build a new Java package, modify the task sequence to install a new one, not the old one.
Awesome, perfect. Dan, I'm going to we'll go with that, and let's get it. I'm going to jump into what I'll call the wrap mode, and then we'll jump into some Q&A here. I'm going to display my screen, and I put in the IM window, instructions for how to undo the mute if you're on phone only, which is *6, and then otherwise. But the goal of our webinar series here was to, a couple weeks ago, discuss enterprise mobility. Today, obviously, we were discussing Windows 10. Your attendance today means that you've got one webinar down. If you'll notice in the bottom left, as a thank you for your participation and to kind of encourage participation and attendance. We were kind enough to get a Microsoft Xbox, so just in time for the holidays here. So with Windows 10 behind us, we've got our Office 365 2 weeks out on November 8th at 11 o'clock, where we're hoping to show you some of the highlights, again, relative to our agenda we had earlier. We certainly have a lot of information. We try to be thought leaders in the next month on the left-hand side. Probably a little difficult for you to see, but we've got 4 events, webinars, again, scheduled. Pretty much one a week here from here till a month from now. We try to be active in the events column, so certainly if you like what you're hearing, come attend. We also try to be active in the blog category, so if you're in the upper right-hand corner, if you wanted to just even type Windows 10, you're going to notice Dan Sharp and John Fedor and a lot of other smart gentlemen and employees from our organization are blogging about Windows 10 items, right? Staying current on builds, those scripts that I talked about, Windows Defender Application Guard, which we didn't get a chance to chat a lot about, but there's a discussion about it there on the blog page. So. And, certainly I think the only real offer coming out of us today is, if you want us to come in and have a conversation with you, there's no obligation. We'll bring the Starbucks, right, or the coffee du jour, and we'll just have a meeting and kind of chat about, where you're at today relative to your Windows 10. And if you want to engage us for a more formalized design discussion about kind of where you might need some help, we're not staffed to do all your Windows 10 rollouts, right? But we are staffed to kind of be the spearhead at the beginning, make sure that you're well planned, well ready, got the tools you need, kind of under good footing, and then let you execute the Windows 10, and certainly we can be there to be your escalation arm if you run into some issues and just kind of handhold you through the process. So that's been our role. I think we're at, I always say 50,000 desktops we've deployed to Windows 10 but again, that's not feet on the street. We're not staffed that way, but Dan and the rest of his team have been instrumental in kind of getting the groundwork laid out. So with that, why don't we stop recording? Adam, if you'll do that, and then anyone who with balance of our time, which is 6 minutes, if you guys want to ask some questions, or we could call it informally, stump the chump, which I guess I'm the chump, or Dan, and we get to be chumps today, Dan, and we'll answer any questions.